It was just another Wednesday night, or so I thought. I'd just finished up some work in the living room when I decided to check on Mia before heading to bed. She's 14, and like most teenagers, she's glued to her phone. Normally, her door's wide open, and she's lying on her bed watching TikToks or texting her friends. But that night, her door was locked. At first, I thought, maybe she's changing or something. I knocked lightly and called out, "Mia? You okay?" No answer. I waited, knocked again, louder this time. "Mia, open up." Still nothing. That's when the knot in my stomach started to form. Something felt wrong. I don't really remember deciding to force the door open. I just remember my shoulder slamming into the wood and the door giving way with a loud crack. The room was dark except for the glow of her phone on the floor, buzzing like crazy. I stepped inside, calling her name, but she wasn't there. My heart started racing. Where could she be? I picked up the phone, and the screen lit up with message after message from someone named Uncle Dave. That's when the first real wave of panic hit me. We don't have an Uncle Dave. I opened the messages, and my stomach dropped. They were full of things like, "Don't forget to come alone," and "I'll be waiting by the park." I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking as I tried to piece it all together. She'd been talking to this guy for weeks, maybe months. The texts showed him grooming her, making her feel like she could trust him. And tonight, he'd convinced her to sneak out and meet him. I tore through her room, looking for any clue about where she could have gone. Her shoes were gone, and so was her jacket. I checked the time, 1:17 a.m. The park he mentioned was a 15-minute walk from our house. I grabbed my car keys and bolted out the door. The drive felt like forever, even though I probably broke every speed limit getting there. My mind was racing with every horrible scenario you can think of. What if she was already gone? What if I was too late? When I got to the park, it was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I started yelling her name, running through the paths with my phone flashlight cutting through the dark. Nothing. I was about to call the police when I heard a muffled cry coming from the edge of the woods. I sprinted toward the sound, and there she was, Mia, sitting on the ground, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't alone. A man, maybe in his 40s, was standing over her, frozen like a deer in headlights when he saw me. I don't remember thinking. I just lunged at him, yelling things I can't even repeat. He ran, and I let him go because all I cared about was Mia. She clung to me, sobbing, saying she was sorry over and over. I didn't care about the apologies. I was just relieved she was alive and in one piece. We sat there for a while, me holding her and her shaking like a leaf. Eventually, I called the cops, and they took over from there. Turns out, Uncle Dave was a predator who'd been targeting kids online for years. He used fake profiles and made up stories to gain their trust. If I hadn't checked on Mia that night, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. It took a long time for us to heal from that night. Mia blamed herself for being naive, and I blamed myself for not noticing the signs sooner. But the truth is, it could happen to anyone. These people are professionals at manipulation. They know exactly how to make kids feel special and safe. Now, Mia and I have a rule: no locked doors, ever. And we talk, really talk, about what's going on in her life. I've learned to pay attention, to ask questions, to be involved without hovering. Because in the end, nothing is more important than keeping her safe. I don't think I'll ever forget the way my stomach dropped when my son, Max, came home from school one Tuesday. He's only 7, full of energy and imagination, so when he told me his substitute teacher, Mr. Brown, was weird, I didn't think much of it at first. Kids say that kind of stuff all the time, right? I figured maybe the guy was strict or a little awkward, but then Max said something that made my skin crawl. "Dad," he said, shoving a handful of goldfish crackers into his mouth, "Mr. Brown kept asking me about you. Like, if you work late or if I have a babysitter when you're gone." I froze. What kind of teacher asks a kid that? I tried not to overreact. I didn't want to freak Max out, but my mind was racing. I asked him to tell me everything he could remember about Mr. Brown. Max shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. He's tall. He had a beard, and he smelled like soup. Okay, not the most helpful description, but I kept pressing. Max said Mr. Brown had been in his classroom all day. He wasn't mean or anything, just off. He didn't really teach much, just let the kids play games and color. But it was the personal questions that stuck with me. Things like, what kind of car does your dad drive? Or does your dad come to pick you up every day, or does someone else? That's when I started to panic. That night, after Max went to bed, I called the school. I figured maybe I could talk to the principal, or at least get some clarity about why this substitute thought it was appropriate to grill my kid about our home life. But when I mentioned Mr. Brown, there was this long pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Brown, the secretary finally said. I'm sorry, but we don't have a substitute teacher by that name. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I explained what Max had told me, and she assured me she'd look into it. But the more we talked, the more it became clear. No one had hired a substitute for Max's class that day. The school's regular teacher, Mrs. Ellison, had called in sick, but they'd shuffled around staff to cover her absence. There shouldn't have been any Mr. Brown in the classroom. The secretary promised to check the sign-in logs and security footage first thing in the morning, but I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about all the questions this guy had asked Max, about how easily he blended in at the school, and about what might have happened if he decided to take things further. The next day, I drove Max to school myself. I didn't want him anywhere near a bus stop or walking alone until I had answers. When we got there, the principal was waiting for me. She looked shaken. We reviewed the footage, she said quietly, pulling me into her office. There's no record of anyone named Mr. Brown signing in, and the camera outside your son's classroom wasn't working yesterday. I felt like I was going to throw up. How does someone just walk into a school, spend an entire day with a bunch of first graders, and then vanish? The principal assured me they were taking it seriously and had already contacted the police. But as comforting as that was supposed to be, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow already too late. Over the next few days, the police interviewed Max. He did his best to help, but he was 7. His memory wasn't perfect. He remembered Mr. Brown had a blue backpack and wore a flannel shirt, but that was about it. No one at the school recognized the description, and no one remembered seeing him leave. I tried to keep things normal for Max, but every time I dropped him off at school, my heart was in my throat. What if Mr. Brown came back? What if he was watching us? Then, about a week later, I noticed something strange. I was taking out the trash when I saw an old sedan parked a few houses down. It didn't belong to any of my neighbors, and it wasn't the kind of car that stands out, but something about it felt off. I couldn't prove it, but I was sure I'd seen it before, parked near Max's school. I grabbed my phone and took a quick picture, just in case. That night, I mentioned it to one of the officers handling the case, and they promised to look into it. A few days later, they got back to me. The car was registered to a man named Keith Brown. He'd been arrested a few years ago for trespassing at another elementary school but hadn't faced any serious charges. That's when it hit me. This guy wasn't some random creep. He knew what he was doing. He'd been scouting schools, looking for vulnerabilities, maybe even targeting specific kids. The police increased their patrols around the neighborhood and the school, and I made sure someone was always with Max, whether it was me, his mom, or a trusted friend. I even installed a security system at home. Eventually, life started to feel normal again, but I never really let my guard down. They never caught Mr. Brown, and to this day, I have no idea what his endgame was. All I know is that my gut was right. Something wasn't adding up, and if I hadn't listened to Max, who knows what could have happened. I still think about it every time I drop him off at school. I watch the teachers, the staff, even the other parents. I know most of them are good people, but there's always that little voice in the back of my head, reminding me that it only takes one. It was a Friday night when Olivia, my 11-year-old daughter, practically begged me to let her go to a sleepover at her friend Emily's house. I'll admit, I wasn't thrilled about it. I didn't know Emily's parents very well, but Olivia promised they were cool and strict about rules. Against my gut feeling, I let her go, figuring I couldn't shelter her forever. By 10 p.m., everything seemed fine. Olivia sent me a quick text saying they were having fun and watching some silly movie. I thought, great, she's happy. I went to bed, assuming the rest of the night would be uneventful. I was wrong. At 12:17 a.m., yes, I remember the exact time, my phone buzzed. It was Olivia. She was whispering, almost crying. "Dad, can you come get me?" she said. My stomach dropped. She wouldn't tell me why, just that she needed to leave. I didn't ask too many questions. I just grabbed my keys and drove. When I got to Emily's house, Olivia was standing on the porch, clutching her backpack like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She ran to the car before I even had time to park. I could tell she'd been crying, her face all blotchy, but she wouldn't say a word. I didn't push her. I just got us out of there. We drove in silence for most of the ride. Every now and then I'd ask, "What happened, Liv? Did someone say something? Did you have a fight?" But she kept shaking her head. Finally, when we were almost home, she whispered, "It's Emily's brother." I felt a surge of adrenaline. I didn't even know Emily had an older brother. "What do you mean? What did he do?" I tried to keep my voice calm, but I'm sure it sounded like I was about to explode. She hesitated, then said, "He kept walking up and down the hallway where we were sleeping. He wouldn't leave us alone." I was fuming now. "Did he hurt you? Touch you?" "No," she said quickly. But he kept asking me and Sophie to go outside with him. He said he had something to show us in the backyard. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "And what did you do?" She finally looked at me, her eyes wide and scared. We said no, but he wouldn't go away. He kept saying we were boring and that no one would know. I got scared, Dad. I didn't know what to do. I pulled into our driveway and turned off the car. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. "You did the right thing by calling me, Olivia. I'm proud of you for that." She nodded but didn't say anything else. I could tell she was still shaken, so I let it go for the night. After she went to bed, though, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that boy, Emily's brother. What the hell was his deal? Was he just being a stupid teenager, or was it something worse? The next day, I decided to call Emily's mom. I didn't want to make a huge deal out of it, but I also couldn't just ignore it. When I brought it up, she sounded off. Like she knew exactly what I was talking about. "Oh," she said after I explained what Olivia told me. "That's just Jake. He's harmless." "Harmless," I repeated, barely keeping my voice steady. "He was trying to get my 11-year-old daughter to sneak outside in the middle of the night. That doesn't sound harmless to me." She got defensive then, saying Jake was just messing around, and that he didn't mean anything by it. I hung up before I said something I'd regret. But inside, I was furious. That weekend, I had a long talk with Olivia about boundaries, about listening to her gut, and about never feeling pressured to stay in a situation that makes her uncomfortable. I told her she did the right thing, but I could still see the fear lingering in her eyes. As for Emily's family, we haven't spoken since. Olivia hasn't been back to their house, and honestly, I don't think she wants to. Every now and then, she'll bring it up. "Dad, do you think Jake would have done something bad?" And I never know what to say. The truth is, I don't know. And that's what scares me the most.